My sister-in-law accused me of cheating with photos. I exposed her fraud and won the divorce. My name is Sofia Benitez, and while the murmur of voices mixed with the clink of glasses in the dining room, my sister-in-law Amanda dropped a manila envelope onto the table like it was a verdict. With a rehearsed gesture, she slid out several photographs that gleamed under the lamp, and the air took on that metallic scent of tension that only shows up when someone thinks they got you cornered. Around me, eyes bounced from the pictures to my face, searching for a crack, a collapse, a confession. I took a sip of water, crossed one leg over the other, and held on to the kind of silence that makes people nervous. The head of the table suited me just fine. From there I could see every single one of them at the same time. Laid out across the polished wood were shots of me. Lunches, coffees, and dinners with different men. Poses that suggested confidences, hands briefly touching in a courteous gesture that, from a distance, could be read as something else. With a tilted smile, Amanda pointed to each one like she was ticking boxes in a game she thought she'd already won. While David's breaking his back, "You're out parading around the city," she said, thrilled with her little show, and passed one of the photos to Leonor, who was breathing a little too fast. David wouldn't look at me. He held his glass with the same forced interest people use to avoid a conversation. Jessica, beside him, faked neutrality way too comfortably. Leonor clutched the picture with trembling fingers and demanded an explanation in that mother's voice that splits the difference between shame and scolding. Once upon a time, that might have cut me to the bone. Today, I just took a deep breath and set my glass down with care, as if the crystal might explode if I moved too quickly. I looked at Jorge, more uneasy than angry, and I knew there was something there still under the surface. Amanda tapped the table with her index finger, impatient for my fall, and demanded that I speak. She didn't realize her hurry was my best ally. "Nice photos," I said at last, in a tone she couldn't tell was gratitude or mockery. "The private investigator you hired really understands angles and lighting. You must have paid well." Her smile evaporated for a second. I opened my purse, pulled out my tablet, and placed it in the center like I was laying down a trump card. I had no intention of denying anything, because there was nothing to deny. The screen lit up with names and meetings, but not in the way Amanda needed. "They're all family law attorneys," I went on, swiping through the records with a finger. "Jaime Moreno, the go-to in this field, Miguel Chavez, who specializes in infidelity cases, and Guillermo Paredes, an expert at tracking assets that conveniently disappear right before a divorce." Once I learned about David and Jessica, I quietly prepared. Emails, contracts, and minutes from those meetings are all backed up with date, time, and signature. I glanced at David and, in his clenched jaw, saw the fear of a man who suddenly realizes the stage belongs to someone else. I gave the faintest smile and thanked Amanda for bringing material that would look even better in court than on this table. Amanda tried to keep the show going, but her script unraveled. She wanted me to defend myself from a place of guilt, to beg for mercy, to crumble in front of her people. I gave her a different kind of scene. Calmly, I explained how, once I discovered David's affair with Jessica, I'd studied my options and built a strategy without theatrics, with the patience of someone who knows the truth needs method. I didn't dispute whether the photos were real. I disputed their interpretation. That nuance was everything. Jorge exchanged a quick look with David when I mentioned property transfers, the sort of phrase that makes the air heavy in any family. I casually noted that money had been moving lately. Businesses were being registered, and assets were being redistributed with a very particular sense of urgency. No one said a word, but the silence said more than any protest. Leonor folded her hands in her lap with a performative piety. Jessica sank into her chair, calculating how far my information might actually reach. Remember, if you like these stories, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. I hired the best attorney in the city. I added without theatrics, sometimes sobriety cuts deeper than shouting. The first documents go out tomorrow. Read the sections on fraud and concealment carefully. I watched Amanda's face lose color. Not out of compassion, just logic. She had finally realized her headlining number was only the opening act of my show. I thanked her for the photos like someone accepting a useful gift and stood up, steady. I walked to the door with my heels marking time, and nobody stopped me. Outside, the night air tasted like freedom. In the car, for the first time that evening, a smile loosened my face. It wasn't revenge. It was relief, taking back my voice in a space where they'd meant to strip it away. I thought of Luca waiting for me, my to-do list with Jaime, the steps left to close one chapter and open another without any debts to my dignity. That same night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages swung from reproach to pleading, from insult to attempted negotiation, and back again. In just hours, Amanda went from invincible to anxious. David sent several short lines, all wounded pride and poorly hidden calculation. I replied to none of them. I muted the noise and got to work organizing evidence because memory is fragile, paper is not. Jaime Moreno's office was exactly what his reputation promised: wood, leather, and an air of decisions that don't allow improvisation. He greeted me without pointless formalities and, with the economy of words of someone who values time, laid out concrete steps. He proposed moving to freeze joint accounts and to lock in the trail of any suspicious activity. It wasn't petty provocation. It was how you keep the other side from moving pieces in the dark. I nodded. I'd spent years believing goodwill was enough. That morning, I chose a different language. When I left his office, the city wrapped around me in its mix of early coffee and traffic. I walked to the parking lot, and before getting into my car, my eyes met Jessica's. Leaning against a dark car, she wore that paper-thin confidence some people mistake for poise. We traded few words, both of us knowing this wasn't about convincing, it was about drawing lines. Her warnings sounded memorized. Mine sounded like promises that didn't need raised voices. Back home, the first sting of dirty tactics was hanging off my side mirror. It dangled by a strip of plastic, and on the passenger seat, a silver earring rested like a signature with no name. I recognized it instantly. I'd seen it sparkle in a birthday photo. I didn't feed the drama. I picked it up, bagged it, and added a line to my notebook. Everything gets documented. Sometimes the difference between losing and winning is keeping your pulse steady while others play scare games. The next morning, Jaime called with surgical precision. He'd found wording in the prenup that, used correctly, would become a lawful weapon in my favor. The plan wasn't to humiliate anyone. It was to restore balance after so much lopsidedness. "Get ready," he said. "They won't sit still." I didn't doubt it. Once people feel exposed, their moves are quick and sloppy. My job was to stay lucid. A conciliation notice arrived with a rush that betrayed the other side's nerves. I accepted without drama. That night, I organized files, binders, screenshots, flagged sections with colored tabs, and paused to breathe every so often, just to remind myself that a shaky voice doesn't invalidate a firm position. I wasn't going to fight for show. I was going to present facts. The conciliation room felt like everyone brought their own theater. David in a suit that sat a little big across the shoulders. Jessica with a notebook pretending to be professional. Amanda's haughtiness showing cracks. Leonor smaller than I remembered. Jaime set his papers down like pieces on a board. The conciliator, crisp diction, laid out the rules. We'd seek preliminary agreements. "Whoever's requesting measures may speak," she said. And without wasting adjectives, Jaime requested a freeze on the joint account and the removal of unauthorized additional cards. David's attorney answered with a catalog smile, arguing there were no irregular transactions and, furthermore, that they would seek custody of Luca until a domicile was defined. Hearing my dog's name warmed me in that essential way. I responded with data, microchip registration, vet history, receipts, consistent care from before the marriage. Talking about affection on paper can sound airy. That's why I brought proof. The conciliator proposed a temporary shared care plan, supervised exchanges, and a neutral handoff point. Not my ideal scenario, but a starting point while the rest of the puzzle moved forward. They brought in a neighbor as an ad hoc witness. He described men in suits coming and going from my building, long hours of meetings. "Attorneys," I said, palm resting on the table's edge, and offered business cards, calendars, and minutes to cross-check. The man sat down relieved, as if returning a backpack that never should have been his. The other side tried a different tack, challenge a clause in the prenup. Jaime requested document comparison, and it was scheduled. Right then I realized they'd studied where they thought my defense might be thin. We left feeling like we contained the first wave. In the hallway, David asked why I was making everything so hard, a phrase as familiar as it was unfair. I didn't argue. Everyone gets their rhetoric. Mine, from that day on, would be the rhetoric of evidence. With his usual calm, Jaime reminded me that the comparison would be decisive if we proved signature integrity and context. We had to move precisely, no getting sidetracked by provocations. On my way home, I opened the drawer where I keep things that can't go missing. The prenup folder was there, label handwritten. I slid through sheet after sheet, stamps, signatures, seals. In the key addendum, I noticed an odd stroke. Not missing, but hurried, different from the rest. I didn't let the doubt spiral. I called Jaime and described it. His answer was as sober as it was reassuring. If the notary certifies, the comparison will land in our favor. As I was heading out with the folder locked down, the building manager approached with a mix of formality and warning. He said someone had requested copies of the parking garage cameras, allegedly from David's attorney's office. They were looking for a specific moment, someone entering my car the night of the earring. A date, a time, a door opening. I asked to see the footage. The hum of the monitoring room drilled into my ears as the timeline rewound. The image was clear in the ways that mattered. A man with a recognizable build, a hoodie that couldn't hide what his profile gave away. Jorge, David's father, opened my car naturally, said something on the seat, and left without hurry, with the calm of someone not worried about being seen. I felt the ground tilt. I asked for a copy on a USB and thanked the manager with the care of someone who knows the thing in her hand weighs more than it looks. I drove straight to Jaime's. We watched the video frame by frame in silence until reality could no longer be rationalized away. "This is gold," he murmured without gloating. We decided not to use it immediately, not for lack of desire, but because moves played too early dull their edge when you need them most. I wanted to understand why. It hadn't been Jessica. It wasn't a stranger. It was Jorge. That night, hunger stuck in my teeth like an invisible spine. Luca, blissfully unaware, slept at my feet with the peace of the innocent. I told myself to keep a steady pulse, not to confuse fury with strategy, not to rush a peace that might still open other doors. Even so, the idea of knocking on Jorge's door settled into me with the stubbornness of the inevitable. I went to his place in Coyoacán just as the city began emptying its streets. The yellow light behind the curtains gave the facade the look of a waiting room. Jorge opened the door like he'd known I was coming. He didn't deny anything. He invited me in with a measured gesture, and once we sat across from each other, the conversation was direct. It hadn't been his idea, he said. He was following a plan Leonor had hatched to distract me with Jessica while they reorganized assets. I listened, without conceding, without absolving, with the same skepticism as watching a coin hit the floor, waiting to see which side it lands on. David's sudden entrance killed any nuance. He demanded to know what I was doing there, his rage filling the room with the sharp smell of freshly poured whiskey. Leonor, pale, leaned on the doorway like the walls had vanished. "Yes, it was my idea," she confessed, voice cracking once she realized there was no elegant exit. She said it was all about protecting the family, that catch-all phrase some people use as a hall pass when the harm helps their own. With his elbows on the table, Jorge added a detail that shifted the ground under the conversation. There was a private document drafted parallel to the official marriage record, signed right there in that living room, presented to me as a bank form. Its purpose was to quietly alter the marital property regime. I didn't ask why in that moment. Why is often a stall tactic to avoid the inevitable. I asked how and when, because that's where the defense lives. I walked out of that house with ice and fire churning in my stomach. Back in my building, under the harsh parking garage lights, I opened an envelope waiting under my door, a summons to an extraordinary hearing at which the other side would present documentary evidence. Bureaucratic language always sounds neutral, but the intent was surgical. I called Jaime, took the paper to him first thing in the morning, and we immediately started hunting for a witness who had seen that signing. I thought of Paola, a college friend who'd been there that day. We hadn't spoken in years, but some presences stay sharp no matter the distance. I found her on social media, and she agreed to meet. At a cafe in La Roma, she described, with a precision that unclenched my shoulders, how that bank paperwork was presented, how I hesitated, how someone named Martín, a friend of David's, sugarcoated the language so nothing would seem serious. I asked if she would testify. She didn't even blink before saying yes. When we hung up with Jaime to add her as a witness, Paola started getting anonymous messages trying to shake her resolve. She told me, with the trembling dignity of someone who knows she's being watched. I asked her not to isolate herself, to document everything, and not to respond. Another reminder of the kind of game the other side was willing to play. I recorded each message and added another line to my notebook. Pressure is evidence, too. I hadn't finished organizing my black folder when Amanda showed up at my door. No battle makeup, dark circles she couldn't hide. She said she'd come to warn me, not to fight. She told me about old photos they planned to use to smear my credibility. Images of me with Mauricio Ortega at restaurants, angles that suggested things that never happened. She said she could get them to me before they went public if I promised not to drag her down if everything sank. I wasn't surprised she wanted something in return. I was surprised that, for the first time, her fear felt real. I accepted the trade with the clarity of a verbal contract. The next day, Amanda came back with an envelope. Inside were the time-worn photos and, on top of that, copies of emails between David and Martín talking about altered dates, plan traps, and Leonor's help to get me to sign without reading. "Don't say I gave them to you," she demanded, and reminded me that Jorge was not the ally I might be imagining. I didn't answer. I filed the material, evaluated chain of custody, and thought through the exact moment when it would be worth its weight in gold. That night a car idled outside my building just long enough for me to notice and understand the message. I didn't go out. I didn't peek through curtains. I logged the time, make, and light sequence. A message from Amanda popped up on my phone. "The photos are in your hands. There's something else you didn't ask for that will explain why you shouldn't trust anyone." I slept in pieces, more for body fatigue than mental peace. Tense days kill your appetite and sharpen other senses. At the comparison hearing, the air felt heavier than usual. Jaime presented the original prenup and the official marriage record. The other side laid out their private paper with overconfident flair. They called Martín, and he stumbled over his own claims of contract experience. When Jaime asked for his professional license number, the floor shook under his answers. Paola walked up, steady, and told the story of the bank form in David's parents' living room, and she batted away attempts to discredit her with a serenity that moved me. The opposing attorney, faithful to her script, tried to introduce those old photos of me with Mauricio. The judge frowned at them and set them aside as irrelevant. I'd barely had time to savor that breath of relief when Jorge walked in with a sealed envelope and handed it to the judge. The session recessed to review the new material. In the hallway, I watched Jorge's back recede without turning around. That measured indifference told me more than any speech could. At home, I found an identical envelope on my bed, for handwritten words that felt like a wink and a threat at the same time. Jaime confirmed that what Jorge had handed over were letters and emails between Leonor, Jessica, David, and Martín, pieces proving prior coordination to manipulate the process. Used well, they could dismantle everything. Used poorly, they could tangle me up. That duality reminded me of the main point. Jorge served his own interests, as changeable as the weather. Paola showed up that night, fear written on her face. A man had approached her outside work, hinting they'd drag up things from her past if she testified. She described a big gold ring. She didn't have to say the name for both of us to think it. I hugged her, grateful and worried at once. I promised to protect her however I could. Her voice was worth more than a document, because it turned paper into story, and before a judge, story has a different weight. The next day, a courier from a real estate firm caught me on the street with a black and white photo. Leonor, Jessica, and Martín at a restaurant table. The date stamped in the corner, weeks before everything blew up. On the back, a line from Jorge that sounded like a conductor's note. This is the meeting where they planned your fall. Choose wisely when to use it. I took the photo to Jaime. He studied it in silence before saying that, together with the letters, it could close the loop. That same afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. A male voice told me that after the hearing, something would happen outside the courthouse. I couldn't tell if it was a real warning or head games. As with everything else, I documented it and told Jaime. We didn't change the plan out of fear, but we did tweak our exit. Different routes, eyes open, discreet company to the car. Prudence isn't paranoia when they've already shown you they like the shadows. The closed-door session with Jorge as a witness was a surgical teardown. He laid out meetings, goals, maneuvers, and, most importantly, admitted that I was never told the true nature of that private document. He presented copies of emails that matched the ones Amanda had given me. And after hearing Paola and seeing the photo of the restaurant meeting, the judge ruled the fake private paper invalid and kept the prenup clause in force. No fireworks, just the quiet kind of justice you breathe. When I walked out, an envelope on my car reminded me that winning doesn't always equal being safe. I knew that already, but I needed to read it to remember. The legal outcome forced David to adjust his numbers and his nerves. He tried appeals that fell apart the second they touched the file's consistency. His relationship with Jessica lost tempo once her role in the strategy no longer made sense. Leonor decided to disappear from certain circles for a while, maybe to lick her wounds out of view. Amanda opened a small cafe in La Roma and, without playing the hero, kept her mouth shut with the discipline of someone who learned the hard way that talking too much is expensive. Jorge stayed a chiaroscuro figure, crucial to flipping the case, and at the same time, impossible to fully read. Sometimes, without a sender and at odd hours, envelopes would arrive with information about deals I didn't care to know about, but I filed them anyway in case I needed a reminder that truth rarely arrives clean. We didn't try to reconcile. We didn't declare war either. We settled into that cold truce where each person understands the other's limit. Remember, if you like these stories, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell.